The last stand for the defense in the Oscar Pistorius murder trial. The Blade Runner looking on and looking exhausted as his lawyer accused the prosecution of twisting facts against a man who's vulnerable and thought an intruder was about to attack him. Now, it is all up to a judge. I'm Dan Kleffler in New York with this developing story. The spotlight was on the defense lawyer today, who focused on how vulnerable the double amputee Olympian felt on that night that he shot girlfriend Reva Steenkamp to death. ABC's Lama Hassan reports.
The last stand for Oscar Pistorius as his defense attorney Barry Rue delivers his final arguments, painting Pistorius as scared, needing to protect himself and not a murderer.
Now you're standing at that door. You're vulnerable. You're anxious. You're trained as an athlete to react to sound. And then
Rue adamant there was no argument the night Pistorius killed his model girlfriend Reva Steenkamp, maintaining Pistorius thought she was in the bedroom when he fired 4 shots through a locked bathroom door at who he thought was an intruder.
if I stand behind someone with his finger on that trigger and he's in a fearful state and I clap my hands behind him, in some instances the person will fire, reflexive, in some instances not.
Also accusing the police of bungling the investigation and tampering with the evidence.
Don't come to court and protest an undisturbed scene and then cross-examine the accused as if that was the scene.
The defense claiming screams heard by neighbors occurred after those shots rang out and that they came from Pistorius crying out for help and not from an argument. For months, the prosecution has pointed out inconsistencies in Pistorius' testimony.
So many lies in such a short period.
But today, Rue striking back, saying that even if there's a reasonable possibility Pistorius is telling the truth, he is entitled to the benefit of the doubt.
ABC's Lama Hassan reporting from London. Joining us now from South Africa via Skype, ABC digital producer Liesl Tom, who was in that courtroom today. Liesl, thanks for being with us today. Appreciate it. So one headline that came out of the courtroom today, defense attorney Barry Rue comparing Pistorius' anxiety from his disability to that of an abused woman. How did the judge respond to that comparison?
Well, Dan, Barry Rue said that Pistorius' anxiety was like the slow burn of a woman who was abused by her husband or a partner, and then one day that last straw breaks the camel's back and she retaliates and kills him. Now, this may have been a very clever trick because Judge Masipa is known to hand down very harsh sentences to men who abuse their wives or partners. But Judge Masipa didn't quite understand what exactly Rue was trying to say, how he could compare Pistorius to an abused woman. So Rue had to break it down step by step for her again. And he said, just as an abused woman will take things for years, she will take those batterings, she will take the verbal abuse for years, and then one day she will get up and take action. In the same way, Pistorius has lived with this fear and anxiety since he was a small boy. And one day, all this angst came together and led to his actions.
Well, today the defense accused the state prosecutor of twisting the facts of this case, even trying to cover up mistakes made by police. What are some of the things that were said in court today?
Well, Rue says one important thing that Gerrie Nel, the prosecutor, is ignoring is the timeline. He says that several state witnesses, and he specifically named the radiologist Dr. Johan Stipp and his wife, have twisted their evidence to fit in with the state's case. Now, the court heard during the trial that there were 2 sets of sounds, and Gerrie Nel told the court that the last set of sounds were in fact the shots. Now, the court heard there were sounds, then screams, and then sounds. Barry Rue says this cannot possibly be like that at all. He says the first sounds were the shots, then came Pistorius' scream for help, and then the second volley of sounds were in fact Pistorius trying to break down the door with a cricket bat. Bruce says Nell is completely ignoring this. He's not even explaining to the court the two sets of sounds because it doesn't fit in with his timeline.
So the prosecution then saying yesterday, Jerry Nell, say that Pistorius was a bad witness throughout this entire trial. Three confusing versions. This is what Nell had said of what had happened. How then did his defense attorney then respond to that charge?
Root told the court that when Pistorius testified, he was completely overwhelmed by depression and remorse, and he was on antidepressants, and all these things may have played a role in his performance on the witness stand. He also told the court that when Pistorius testified, he had already crossed swords with Gerrie Nell during his bail application, and he was absolutely petrified of this prosecutor. I have to tell you, Dan, that Gerrie Nell has quite the reputation in South Africa, and Roo says Pistorius was petrified of the prosecutor, which may have been one of the reasons why his evidence wasn't as good as it could have been. He said the two versions, the one that Pistorius thought he acted in self-defense and the other that he fired without thinking. Roo says these things aren't mutually exclusive, but in fact they support each other, and they all paint the same picture of a man scared, thinking that he cannot flee, he has to take action to protect himself and his beloved, all leading to this tragedy.
A very intense back and forth in those final moments. Liesl Tom in South Africa. Liesl, thank you for that report. Always appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Oscar Pistorius now has to wait until September 11th for the verdict. The judge today announcing that she will take 5 weeks to consider the case. So I want to bring in ABC's Chief Legal Affairs anchor Dan Abrams to discuss the latest on this. Dan, this has been a very long 5-month emotional trial. It is over. Given the fact that there has been that much testimony laid out there, 5 weeks to deliberate, does that seem like an appropriate amount of time to process all of that?
Yeah, well, look, remember, it's not just a deliberation, right? We think of deliberations here, we think of juries, and we think of a jury coming back after deliberating and rendering its verdict. Here, the judge is going to issue a very detailed written ruling. And if you compare that to the way judges issue rulings here, it's actually quite quick to say that, after hearing all of this evidence, sometimes we see judges here take months to issue rulings. So I guess my point is that I think that 5 weeks makes sense to me. Remember, it's not just her. She's got 2 assessors as well, effectively assistants who are there to help primarily with the facts of the case, and the 3 of them together are to render this verdict. So 5 weeks makes some sense to me.
In your opinion, then, who made the more compelling case? The prosecutor, the bull terrier, who argues that Pistorius shot through that door in a fit of rage after the couple had been fighting that night, or is it the double amputee, the vulnerable, fearing for his life? He thought an intruder had broken into that bathroom.
Well, look, I don't think there's any question that as a legal matter, Oscar Pistorius should be convicted of something here. And when I say something, I mean, first of all, they're the firearms charges. Very hard for him to claim that he didn't fire a weapon when all these witnesses, depending on which charge you're talking about, various witnesses testified that he did exactly what he's charged with here. I don't think there's any question that he's going to be convicted on some or all of the firearms charges. And I also think that it's hard to figure out a scenario whereby he's not at least guilty of what's called culpable homicide, meaning even if you believe him that that's what he thought, it was still negligent of him, at the very least, grossly negligent, to fire into that door. There is no justification for that as a legal matter, in my view. The question becomes, will the judge, along with these assessors, convict of murder? And the prosecutors put forward a pretty convincing case that his story doesn't make sense. But the question isn't whose story makes more sense. The question is, has the prosecution proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt? And that we're just going to have to wait and see on.
I want to get your thoughts on what the defense used as their technique, because today Barry Rue comparing Pistorius' anxiety from his disability to that of an abused woman. I want to play some of what he said.
I understand it when you speak about an abused woman situation. How does it apply to the accused in this case?
You're a little boy without legs. You experience daily that disability and the effect of this.
Dan, clumsy comparison, or did that work?
Yeah, I mean, look, you understand sort of philosophically what the attorney is trying to do. But as a practical matter, by the judge interrupting him, it tells you that he should regret having made that comparison. I mean, of course the judge understood what he was saying, but the judge was in effect saying, wait, are you really making this comparison? And then he tries to explain further, well, yes, I'm comparing him based on the vulnerability he felt, etc. But it was a really dumb comparison to make, particularly in a case like this. I think that it was a mistake, and I would guess even he probably views it as a mistake now after being interrupted by the judge.
Well, lastly, I want to get your thoughts on another move by the defense, suggesting several times today that his client should, if anything, be facing culpable homicide or negligence charges, not murder charges. What do you make about that approach?
Well, again, that goes to the point I was making a moment ago, which is that he's almost, not quite, he's almost conceding that his client's going to be guilty of culpable homicide, this lesser crime. And I think that would be a huge win for Oscar Pistorius if he were convicted of the lesser crime of culpable homicide. So the attorney clearly trying to give the judge another option here, because as I pointed out, a not guilty verdict, not even negligent in shooting into the bathroom at his own home, that's almost impossible to ask the judge to do. And so I think what you're seeing here is a plea for a compromise to say, convict him of the lesser crime, there's no mandatory minimum, then we can start talking sentencing. But, that's not an easy argument for Pistorius either.
And so we wait the 5 weeks to find out what the verdict, in fact, will be. ABC's Chief Legal Affairs anchor, Dan Abrams. Dan, thank you so much for your time and your insights today.
Dan. Yep.
Of course, you can stay up to date with this story in real time by downloading the ABC News app and starring the story for exclusive updates on the go. For now, I'm Dan Kleffler in New York.